Hello and welcome to Crisis What Crisis. I'm Andy Coulson, a former newspaper editor, Downing Street Director of Communications and one-time inmate of HMP Belmarsh. Over the last 6 years, I've put all of my experience, the good and the bad, to use as a strategic advisor to business leaders, and I can tell you that the bad has been just as useful as the good. And that got me thinking that there are plenty of great podcasts out there where you can hear stories of success, but there are far fewer where you can benefit from the experiences of those whose lives have properly unraveled. So on this podcast, you'll hear from the embattled and stoic, the shamed, courageous, ruined, damaged, unlucky and lucky survivors of crisis, all talking in the hope that they might serve as a useful guide to anyone facing down their own demons and challenges. Crisis What Crisis is generously supported by Mindstream, a brilliant company who harness the power of music for personal well-being and improving human performance. Just search for Mindstream, that's Mind with a Y, on Spotify, and you'll find some really great playlists. I'm thrilled to bits that my guest today is the amazing Lorraine Pascale, former model, TV cook, and full-time force of nature. A woman who has known incredible success in her life, the first black woman to appear on the cover of US Elle magazine, the best-selling author of countless cookery books, and as the presenter of hit TV shows here and in America. But Lorraine is also someone who, in particular as a young girl, has known real despair. Given into care as a baby, she was fostered, adopted, and then heartbreakingly handed back into the system again when her mum, struggling herself with addictions, couldn't cope. These events left scars, of course, for Lorraine, which have impacted her as an adult. As she says, crisis has been a big part of my life. The things in childhood I couldn't control, and in adulthood, most of which I probably caused. Crisis felt like a great sense of familiarity and safety, because it was what I was used to. But instead of giving in to the demons, Lorraine has put them to work. This podcast is the latest example of the Pascale mission to, as she puts it brilliantly, make my mess the message. Lorraine, now studying for a psychology PhD, has been through the therapy mill and has tried most of the techniques and processes on offer in the recovery space. And aside from a moving and really valuable story, she also has a very practical and no-nonsense view on what's worked and what's not worked for her. So, loads of lessons here in this episode. I hope you enjoy it. Hi, Lorraine. Welcome to Crisis What Crisis. How are you today?
I'm very good, thank you. Lovely to be here.
Lorraine, if it's right that you can divide most people, and it might not be, but if you can divide most people into two groups, life enhancers and life sappers, then you are without doubt in the former and most definitely not in the latter. I'd urge anyone listening to this to spend half an hour on your Instagram account. If I'm perfectly honest, a lot of the self-improvement content you see on Instagram is, particularly for a middle-aged bloke like me, it's a bit nauseating. But yours is, I don't know, it's just bloody cheerful and really useful. And it's also a testament, I think, to your ability to reset from model to baker, TV presenter, and now would-be doctor. You've just embarked on a psychology PhD, and you're also a life coach. And as I say, all-round life enhancer. You've said, I think, well, you're very welcome. You've said in typical style for you that your childhood, you were put into care as a baby, fostered, adopted, and then for reasons that we'll discuss, re-fostered, that childhood has powered your professional life in a way that it gave you a drive that you might not have had otherwise. That's how you see it, right?
Yeah, I think when you go through bad times, you've got two choices. You can either wallow in it or grieve a bit about what it should have been, what you wish it was, and then just get on with it. And that's kind of been my philosophy. It's always been like, how can I make things better? So I've done a lot of grieving of my past, the childhood I didn't have and all of that. But then there just comes a time when you've got to take off, get out of the pity pool and, grab life by the horns and go for it.
You made a brilliant documentary about your fostering experience. I think you can still find it online. There's a moment in that documentary, Lorraine, when you meet the couple John and Marion, I think it was, who fostered you after you were put into care. This is not the couple who then adopted you. They fostered you for a while. And it's an incredibly moving moment when this lady, who was in her early 20s when she fostered you, is then sat in her sitting room with you, almost 40 years later, and describes to you how she wanted to adopt you herself, but decided, in fact, that another couple who, she puts it, she was working class, they were middle class, she decided that they might give you a better life. She sat there with tears streaming down her face, and she describes the precise moment that she handed you into the arms of someone else. And you just see, it's a very sort of visceral example of how, the sliding doors in our lives operate. And you're crying in the clip too, but you're also self-contained. You're kind of looking at it almost as an observer. So what was in your mind at that moment?
Well, it's the whole thing was very strange, because doing that documentary, they found all the paperwork about my whole childhood. So everything that I thought or imagined was there in black and white. So that was it's almost great validation that you're not going mad and thinking you're overreacting. But that actual moment when I met her, it was I got a great sense of calm, and I got a huge amount of sadness and grief, as you say, the sliding doors, what could have been. Even though I love my parents who adopted me, it wasn't an easy ride. And she saved my life. The foster parent saved my life, because when I was first went into care, well, I was born and I was with them for 6 months, from 6 weeks old. And then after 6 months, I went to my biological father's, and Marion, my foster mother, just wanted to check up on me, see how I was doing. And she went to see me, which you were allowed to do more easily those days. And I'd lost loads of weight. I was crying all the time. I'd lost my hair. I wouldn't stand up. I wouldn't sit down. I was, grossly underfed. And so the social services came and did an emergency. They took me out of there and gave me back to Marion. So this is a woman that saved my life. It sounds really dramatic, but
it's true.
To meet somebody who did that was incredible. But then I also had a lot of sadness for what could have been, if I'd have stayed with her. Because now we're amazing. I still call her my foster mother. We speak nearly every day, but it took us about, I'd say, 5 years from that filming to not cry every time we spoke.
Is that right? So you stayed in it was another sliding door moment making the documentary, and you found each other again, and now you're incredibly close. I didn't know that.
We're very close. Yeah, she's coming to my wedding. We're very close. Yeah. Wonderful.
At one stage, Lorraine, I think you were 7. Your adopted mum, Audrey, who was struggling with alcohol and depression, handed you back into the system to be fostered again. I think she'd divorced by this stage from your adopted dad, Roger. Yeah. And you're there in another foster home alone, and yet one of the many amazing things about you is that you refuse to use the word abandoned. In fact, when you see that word, and I think that word has been used in newspaper headlines, it makes you angry. Just explain that for me, because if there's a definition of abandoned, that feels pretty accurate, but you don't feel that way.
No, to me, it's being left on a park bench. That's abandoned, because they've left you with no one around. You might get eaten, taken by, you're not in a safe place. So I think that if my mother took the time to speak to social services and, maybe rejected, I'd say, I felt rejected, but I wasn't abandoned, because to me it's like an abandoned when you're, in the middle of a forest, left in the middle of a forest in a cardboard box. And some people are left that way. And so it's kind of, I wouldn't put that label on me, because that's not what I've experienced, because that's a very different experience to be totally abandoned, because it would appear then that they didn't actually care at all if they've just left you in the middle of nowhere.
That's interesting, because you're being very precise about the importance of using the right word when in, crisis. If we're going to kind of, you use that theme, which obviously is the sort of the sort of theme of this podcast, using the right word. What do you think about the word crisis, out of interest?
Well, crisis has been a big part of my life, and I've had many crises in my childhood, ones that I couldn't control, in my adulthood, most of which I probably caused, to be honest. And so crisis to me used to be a great sense of familiarity and almost safety, because it's something that I was used to. So being in the middle of a crisis, drama, it felt like, it's familiar, this is good. And I think that's why I used to create them so frequently. I didn't know this consciously at the time.
How soon in your adulthood, as you put it, how soon did that start to sort of manifest itself, if you like?
Probably 20s.
And how did it manifest itself?
Just drama, arguing with my partner, and then husband. Sort of very almost, just drama. And then sometimes if life was very calm, then I would create something. And I remember my therapist used to say to me, the thing is, Lorraine, when life is going calm and well for you, sometimes you just throw in a hand grenade, a drama hand grenade, and create a crisis.
And your understanding of that now is what was going on there, that for you, kind of chaos and crisis went hand in hand with with trying to find some form of security in your life. That those two things were kind of had to be there.
It's more a familiarity, and it's more like my nervous system was very used to always being on high alert, always being hyper vigilant, and so that was very familiar to me. And so when I wasn't in that state, it didn't feel familiar. So I would create that. So you're a great believer, aren't you, in the kind of physical impact of crisis? Yeah, because if you're a child and you've had terrible things happen, sometimes you don't remember, but your body remembers. Your body remembers, and you might have, someone might say a word, or you might smell or see something, and suddenly you're back in that whatever moment it is, if you've had like a lot of trauma and things like that. So there's a thing about the body keeps the score.
Great book.
And it's a great book. And I think that's really moving forward in sort of therapy. It's really important to incorporate the body as well. But crisis to me is strangely familiar, and now I've learned that it's not a good thing, consciously as well, and that calm is good. Yeah.
But as I say, it has also provided a drive for you, or it did provide a drive. How have you kind of reconciled that? How have you found the balance?
I don't know if it's genetic, or I don't know if it's, something that I've just read and learned, but for me, I knew on some level that it didn't feel, even though it felt familiar, that my life around me was chaotic. Relationships not working, me not feeling great. So I knew that something wasn't right. And that's when I did a lot of work on myself, and continue to do so, because I didn't want the crisis that I created. I wanted to have as much calm and peace in my life as possible. So that's what I kind of spent my life doing. And part of that is doing work that I enjoy. So part of that is having a purpose and good friends. And, I think some people say, oh, you've done so well, even though you've been through X, Y, Z. And I think that I don't think there's an even no. I think it's because of, if that makes sense. It's not like, oh, wow, I've dragged myself up. I think it's given me more drive and just the will to really want to make myself happy. And that part of that is achieving, being a high achiever, or whatever label they put on me, ambitious, whatever they call me.
What is the right label?
Ambitious in America is fantastic, right? You're ambitious like this, but here it's a dirty word. So, she's a bit ambitious, isn't she?
Yeah.
So I'll take ambitious, I'll take a high achiever, but the only person it's to impress is myself. It's because I love studying, I love improving, I love learning. So people can put whatever label they like on me.
It's important to understand, I think, before we move on from your childhood, that there were some, there were some properly dark moments for you and I think your older adopted brother. Your mum admitted, hitting you both at one stage. She thought about pushing you under a bus. Again, we should explain that she was clearly, very ill herself.
Yeah.
I mean, these were. The word trauma also gets used, a bit like crisis, gets used pretty kind of widely these days. But I don't think anyone would disagree that is deeply, deeply, traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us how you begin to kind of come to terms with that, with those elements, if you like, because you are also someone, and this is the bit about your philosophy that I really love, is that you're not about blame at all, or self-pity for that matter. When you've got, if I just use the example that I just mentioned, you've got some calls to apportion blame, if I can put it that way.
I think in the early days I was maybe angry and then blame, pointing the finger. But my mother was in AA, and she was always very keen for me to go to Al-Anon, which is for people who, and Alateen for teenagers, for people who've grown up with alcoholic parents. And one of the first things you learn there is to keep the focus on yourself. So there's things like, I didn't actually go until I was about 25, and she's been trying to make me go for years. But there's things like, they say, if you keep pointing the finger out, but that eventually you need to turn the finger on yourself. So even though these people may have wronged you, done terrible things, and that doesn't take away from that, never will. However, now it's my responsibility to make myself feel better, because I'm not going to feel better by blaming other people all the time. So it's about accountability and realizing this is part of growing up, that, okay, yeah, there were not particularly my parents, but if you had a horrible time, awful, this, that, and the other, you grieve it, you go through it, you process it, but then you have to come to terms with the fact that it's your responsibility to sort it out now. So that's kind of a big lesson as well as you get older, like going on at your parents, well, you did this, you did that. Yeah, I'm sure they did a lot not right. I'm sure I will do a lot not right. But then there comes a point when you have to take responsibility for your own feelings and your own emotions. And that's really important. And that's what Al-Anon really taught me, that it's up to me. Yeah. And they, get out of the pity pool. It's up to me to sort things out.
Yeah. You touched on it earlier, but you've used the phrase that it's about your biology, not your biography, which I like a lot. But yeah. Are you when you say that, are you saying that there's this kind of also a bit of kind of genetic luck, or
absolutely,
or you can be genetically unlucky?
Yeah, I mean,
and so from your birth parents, you went back, spent time with your birth father. I think you met your birth mother much later.
Yes.
That you think that they actually provided you with some genetic resilience, do you think?
I don't know if it was them or a distant grandparent or something like that, but I absolutely a fundamental believe, there's a big part of, because obviously depression, anxiety, that's got lots of its roots in but in your biology. But I'm definitely a big believer in that, and that can be affected. It can be passed down. Like if your mother's really anxious when she's pregnant, it can be passed down to you. So yeah, but I think there is a lottery. I think they say there's a percentage of you that's genetically happier than the rest. You can actually change, but there's definitely kind of a percentage that is your genetics of how happy your baseline state is. I think it's like 40% you can change or something.
Wow. And you hold to that idea? Obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it varies a bit, but then you can and you can't change your genetics necessarily, but you can change your hormones, you can do things, you can work on your dopamine, you can make sure you have a routine, you can make sure you're achieving, you can find a purpose so you can do these things. Beat the biological system. That's what I say.
Brilliant. You met your birth mum, as I mentioned, but you didn't want to develop a relationship with her. And this is such an interesting area. You know, we've talked about it on this podcast previously with Lem Cisse. I don't know if you've read his book, amazing story, and Nikki Campbell as well, who, you know, both of them have very different adoption stories. But both, like you, also, you know, very resilient individuals. But meeting once was enough for you, even though your relationship with your adopted mum was obviously for long periods very difficult. You weren't searching for another answer, if you like, or if you were, you decided you weren't going to find it there.
Because I know a lot of people think that if they've been adopted, if they find their birth parents, you know, the missing piece of the jigsaw, and they'll be fulfilled. I never had that. I never thought that by finding them was going to make any difference. And so I never had the really desire to. But I found my biological sister, which I was kind of very interested in. I found my biological sister, and she wanted me to meet my biological mother. And when I met her, it was okay. You know, it was just like meeting a stranger at the bus stop. She didn't really ask me any questions. There was no like touching, as in, you know, hugs or anything like that. And I just went away, and I just thought, you know, I don't need anything else. I don't need anything else in my life that might cause any problems. And if, say, it's almost a protection thing as well, because I'm like, if she said, oh, I don't want to see her anymore. I mean, I couldn't take the double whammy, being given away at birth and then meeting 40 years later and then her saying, I don't want to see you again. So definitely, if I'm honest, it was self-preservation as well. And also the thought, like, my mother, she's passed away now, but she's my mum, and she's the person that looked after me.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I just didn't have the desire to find. It was nice to see what she looked like. That was really, I have always wanted to know what she looked like. We looked very similar, scarily similar.
What was her attitude then to that meeting? I mean, you came into her life. You were a very successful woman by that stage. You know, she'd obviously knew and followed from a distance what was happening in your life. You know, she knew who you were, and she knew what you were doing, and was sort of standing from a long distance watching that. right. Astonishing. Astonishing. That these things suddenly kind of appear as a connection.
Yeah. Yeah. Strange.
Your life as a model, very successful. And you were a trailblazer for British black models, scouted at 16, first cover of US Elle, for a black model, Sports Illustrated, but also a really competitive, tough world, and resilience required there as well, right? Would you say that that's where you first began to realize how resilient you are, how tough you are?
I think and I think it also made me more resilient, because you cannot have, the number of rejections you can get in one day, and it's not your work, it's you. You're too this, too that, too tall. Back then they could say they don't want any black girls on the show, your shoulders are too wide, you're this and that. So, and sometimes maybe 9 a day. So that makes you tough. It also can drive you mad.
Yeah.
As in crazy.
Yeah. So in many ways, possibly one of the more difficult choices, although I'm sure kind of exciting and rewarding in lots of ways, but also an incredibly difficult environment to put yourself in, given the story that we've just heard, that you're opening yourself up to that kind of scrutiny and judgment and, all those things. I mean, were you feeling that at the time, or had the drive that we've described just taken over and was just powering you through all that?
No, I think at that time I was enjoying it. It was a lot more fun as well. We had a lot more fun, like at work, doing the shows, and there was like a group of us that would do all the shows, London, Paris, Milan. So there was kind of a sense of belonging, a sense of family, a sense of community. It was just the bits in the middle, but that were difficult. But then the more well you did, the more successful you became, there was a lot less of the rejection. So it was actually quite a comforting space as well. Now I know it's much harder, and you didn't have to be quite so thin those days either.
Yeah, you think it's a lot tougher now?
Yes, I think it's much tougher now. There's many more models, many more international models.
Yeah,
I think it's much tougher. Definitely.
You don't talk much about, both in terms of the modelling, but also interestingly, you're a black child with white adoptive parents growing up in sort of rural Oxfordshire, and also I suspect, or not suspect, obviously in the world of modelling. I mean, that must have been really tough, right? From a racism perspective. I mean, how do you reflect on that, both in terms of your childhood, but also those early days as a model?
I think for me, it's this is why I'm quite interested in the area of belonging, because diversity and inclusion is obviously super important. I'm a black woman who grew up with white family, and so I'm kind of, sometimes I feel like I'm a bit of both, if that makes sense. I've always tried to be philosophical about this issue, because otherwise I think I would go a bit mad, because you can get totally paranoid. Why didn't they ask me? Why didn't they ask me that question? And why didn't someone give me this? Or why didn't I get that job? Is it because I'm black? Or is it because they don't think I'm very good? Maybe they think I'm rubbish, So it's difficult. It's very, very difficult. It's a very sensitive subject, very sensitive. Yes, it's very hard being black. It's very hard in many situations, but it's very hard for other people in a lot of situations as well. But yeah, it was hard being a black model in the early 90s. It was very, very hard. You just didn't get the jobs. And they just justify it by saying, well, in Germany is mostly pale, white skinned, so you're not going to work very much over there. And then Japan is not work over there. And, and we don't put black girls on the cover because there's not many black people in the United Kingdom. So we need to represent, and off we go. Yeah.
When you finish modelling, you, well, first of all, you seem to spot that the time in modelling is up for you. You make that decision yourself. It seems to be very deliberate, and you've grabbed hold of it. And then you decide to retrain. And this is fascinating, right? Because you think about a bunch of different careers, potentially going, I think, for a short period of time, from modelling to being a Skoda car mechanic. Now, car mechanic is understandable, but Skoda. No, but you decide to make that leap. At one point, I think maybe it's retraining as an interior designer. You also think about hypnotherapy. I think you worked with Paul McKenna for a while. What's going on there that you are making these very unusual, kind of career decisions? You are totally sort of reinventing, and of course, in the end, you settle on cookery, on baking, and we'll get into that in a second. But just tell me what's in your mind at that stage. You're a young mum. You're thinking about the future and your daughter, Ella, her future. What's going on in your mind then?
What's going on in my mind is that modelling was a world where I just got married, and I didn't want to be travelling all around the world and not having time with my daughter. So I wanted to find a career, A, that I could be at home more, and B, that I was passionate about. So my father he's retired. He was a Spanish teacher, and he was very passionate about his job. He loved his job. It gave him great sense of fulfillment, meaning and purpose. And I wanted to have that in my job too. So even though I did enjoy lots of the parts of modeling, I really wanted to find, that thing that made me tick, as well as being at home. So that's when I bought a book called What Colour Is Your Parachute? And I think I just read the end of each chapter rather than the whole book. And I did the exercises, and it was like, write all the things that you love or like doing, and then next to it, write what could be a career out of it. So from interiors to cars and mechanic and cooking, and that's how. And then I'd do a day course or some introductory course or something, see if I liked it, then not like it, change. Until
you did 6 months as a car mechanic, right?
I did, yeah, but it was only like a couple of times a week. So
right.
It took me. I think it was fine in the summer, and then when it got cold, sitting, lying on the floor in a cold garage in December, I thought, this is not for me. This is not for me.
It's a tough choice, Lorraine. It's a tough choice.
Yeah, not for me. Driving down to Deal. So
okay.
yeah, I've just trial and error, and then I took like a 10-week cookery course at Leeds School of Food and Wine.
And this is when the cooking, the baking sort of kicks in for you. And as you've just mentioned, maybe there's something genetic there that's kind of beginning to fire up.
So it was cooking, and then I specialised in baking. But yeah, it must have been in there. I used to love baking at school as well, even though we only did it once a year.
Yeah. So, we really are fast forwarding now, but, 1 million cookbooks later, an awful lot of hit TV shows as well. Incredible success. Again, at this stage, do you think you're still being sort of powered by your past to a degree?
Or genetics, maybe a mixture of both. So I'm not doing TV so much anymore. I kind of retired from cooking because I began to think that it was almost like a world of modelling as well. So modelling, you can't really do what you want. You're kind of like a human coat hanger, and you get told what to wear and this and that. And then with cooking, I thought, it's my own. I can develop it, do what I want. But then I kind of found, again, I'm being told what to cook, when to cook. And it felt very familiar in a not great way to modelling in a funny way. I wanted more autonomy. So from
the outside, sorry to interrupt, but from the outside, it looked like you have fantastic autonomy. You're writing your cookbooks, you're presenting your own TV show, you're doing a whole load of stuff, in that world around. Also, by the way, at a time when cooking and baking is absolutely exploding as an area of interest for people on TV and elsewhere. But it's really interesting. You didn't feel in control of it.
First, initially, yes, 100%. So the first couple of books, yes. And the thing is, it's a shame because I love writing recipes for people. I love seeing what people cook. I love it when they put it on Instagram, and I really enjoyed that process. But kind of as time went on, there were all changes going on at production companies and TV stations. And they were like, okay, we need you to do this kind of thing. We need to do that kind of thing. And I just found myself falling out of love quite so as much as I did before with what I was doing. And I felt like it's really important to me. I'm 48 now, but I would like more autonomy. And so I did the shows in America as well, which is judging on a show which is like Bake Off, but it's more X Factor style. So I did that for a while, which was really good fun. And then over lockdown, I just thought, you know what, I really want to be at home more, and I don't want to be traveling. And I think I will hang up my baking apron, and try something else.
Just before we move on to that decision, I mean, it was an incredibly successful career. It had it wasn't all upside though. You had a bakery, didn't you, at one point? I think in Covent Garden.
Yeah.
That didn't work out as a business. I mean, not a crisis, although maybe you do, professionally, maybe you do look at that time. I'm interested in how you handled that, really, because, we had Mark Hicks on the podcast, who's, obviously had an empire of restaurants and, whatnot across London and lost it all. How did you cope with that kind of time?
I'd say it was very much a crisis. So first of all, it was great and, new, getting all the stuff. I was driving around and getting stuff from eBay because unfortunately lots of bakeries were struggling. So there was loads of stuff on eBay, setting it up. And I didn't close the business because it wasn't successful. I closed the business because I can't manage people. I love people, but I don't want to manage people. I'm not good at it. So it was a crisis. It was like a 3 a.m. email to everyone I know saying, I can't do this anymore. I just can't. When you're working with fresh goods, so much can go wrong. And if one thing goes wrong, the whole thing goes wrong.
Right.
And so it was too much. I'm just not cut from the cloth of being able to manage groups of people. So it was very much a crisis. And then someone else managed it for a year and a half with me, which made it a lot easier. And then I made the decision to close it down.
Difficult, because it was your baby.
You know what? It was difficult because I felt in a way I was letting people down, because I know people would come and they'd see my show and they'd love to come and see me in the bakery. We do pictures, and I love meeting people and meeting people like that. So I really missed that. But it was just for my sort of mental health and my sanity that I thought it was the best idea. I've got to practice what I preach. And, when it comes to a decision, you're not sure, always put your mental health first. So that's what I did.
Yeah, but also it sounds like confronting, what you're good at and what you're not good at, what you enjoy, what you don't enjoy. That's, basic stuff, but pretty important, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, again, just before we move on to the next phase of your career, you also, and we met around this time, you also had a really tough time on social media, some properly unpleasant idiots on Twitter in particular. I remember us having conversations about that, and you would have been forgiven easily for giving up on social media because of the sort of vile stuff that was going on, but you punched through yet another demonstration of your resilience. How do you sort of reflect on that now?
Well, the worst thing about that is when you're having a bad time on social media, it becomes like it goes in the newspaper, and it's like it's even magnified, and everyone's talking about it, and then it was horrible. Like, you can pretend to be really tough and everything's fine, but it hurts. It's just the same as someone coming up to the street, out in the street, and saying something horrible. But you do get thicker skin pretty quick, and also a lot of compassion for these people. So these people are at home, and for what it must take to be horrible to someone that you don't know, you've never met, and just be a bully. They must have some really sad things, unfortunate things going on in their heads and their lives. So I do have a lot of compassion as well. I don't like it. Wow. I probably don't like them.
That is a very generous. That is a very, very generous and very compassionate attitude to take, and that presumably then is why you stuck with social media, because I mentioned your Instagram account earlier, which is just fantastic, but you just decided not to abandon, which a lot of people do actually when they find themselves in those circumstances, not to abandon it, not to leave it. And instead you just kind of embraced it and turned it into what you wanted it to be.
Yeah, I love social media, and I think that it's a great place. It's a great platform if you use it properly. So like, if anyone triggers me, if anyone says anything insulting, I just unfollow. The accounts I follow, they like educate, inspire, encourage me. So I think it's a really lovely place. It can be. I mean, Twitter's a little bit darker. Twitter's a bit dark. If Instagram's flowers and fairies, I think Twitter's kind of like a dark nightclub.
Twitter is the underworld. Exactly.
It's the underworld.
Yeah.
And so I'm not that prolific on Twitter, because I think it's just a place to kind of say quite negative stuff a lot of the time. So
yeah.
Not so much my thing.
Let's talk a little bit more then about your decision to move on from baking, from cooking. Yeah, a lot of people wouldn't have had that bravery, right? Although you felt that you didn't have control, it was also still, I assume, you know, it was pretty lucrative, pretty comfortable place for you to stay. But you decided not to. And it's this kind of drive to reset, if you like, or not to reset, actually, just to progress. That's there again. Just try and give us a little bit more of a flavour of what's driving you towards that. And if I can add another question to it, because I know that you've tried and experienced therapy in a lot of its different forms. How important was that as well in the sort of decisions that you were making?
I think it's really important. Therapy has been a huge part of my life because obviously I was kind of riddled with issues, rejection issues and all this kind of thing. And so I've always seen therapy as a really important thing. And I have sort of therapy for the deep and meaningful, you're going over your childhood and that kind of thing. And then sometimes I'd have therapy which is more like a coaching thing, like, you know, like everyday problems, you're not going really deep. And I think very modern and not so unusual now for people to have more than one career. I guess it's just I'm in the public eye, so it looks more obvious. So you can call them multi-hyphenate or multi-potentialite or whatever you want to call it, but it's part of growth for people that we went out with sometimes when we were 16. I mean, some people, yes, but maybe we wouldn't want to go out with them now. And it's the same as a job. We maybe wanted when we were 25, maybe we don't want it now at 48. So I think it's a natural part of one's of evolving to change. And you know, if one can, I know it's not easy. I know not everyone has the luxury. I do appreciate that, of just being able to hop jobs. I know it can be quite difficult.
I don't think it's luxury. I don't think it's the luxury. It's the bravery bit that I'm interested in, because it's not. It's also quite. It's courageous, right?
You think?
Well, because it was going well. It was, as I say, I'm sure, providing a lovely life, and you were very good at it. And although as you've explained, clearly you were unhappy with the levels of control that were being exerted because it's TV, and because even with books that can be very, as you say, very restrictive. Still a great success. So it takes courage to say, no, actually, this is not for me. I'm going to have a go at something else.
Maybe courage is maybe it appears to be courage. Maybe it appears to be courage, but I think a lot of it is self-belief. And I don't know if that was instilled a bit in part by my mother. So I was strange. Like I had this self-belief, but then I also was really insecure and have rejection issues. So I had the self-belief that I could succeed at whatever I put my mind to. So I've always had that. And so to me, it's just like, well, why wouldn't I try this? It's more that. So I know Simon Sinek always talks about having a why. And I always talk about having a why not. Why not? Why not give it a try? What's the worst that can happen? Doesn't work out, and then I'll try something else.
Fantastic. So you decide to put all this experience to use to kind of let it frame what approach you're going to take as a student, first as a master's, now, as I mentioned, PhD. Dr. Pascale obviously has an air of inevitability about it, but also as a coach, right? And a coach with this very specific approach, an approach that might be described, as I said earlier, as sort of stoic therapy. Put simply that, as we've already discussed, confront and deal and understand the things that happened to you, but refuse to be held back for them, and by them rather, and that this idea that self-pity is pointless. Have I sort of captured the Pascale approach correctly?
I think self-pity is part of the process, but I think wallowing in it is not helpful. So we all have had self-pity. That was one of the phases, isn't it? When something goes wrong, there's a crisis, of course there's a self-pity phase. You put your wellies on and you wade through that self-pity pool, and you're so upset, poor me. But then there comes a time when you have to go, okay, it's time to get out of this now. And then maybe you go for a bit of grief, as in sadness or maybe anger. And then we come to, right, action. Let's move on and let's get on with it. But it's definitely a process.
Do you still have poor me days?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
What happens?
I'll just sit in my bed and watch Netflix all day or something. Yeah, just watch Netflix, Real Housewives, watch some TV, RuPaul's Drag Race, and eat too much, and then the next day I'm normally fine. But I allow those days. I allow those days of, I don't know if it's sadness or grief, but now I used to kind of go deep, dig deep, and ask all these questions. But I used to do that, but now I don't. I just kind of allow it. I'm not having a great day. I'm not feeling that great about myself. So I'm no use to anyone apart from Netflix. And there we are.
Yeah, I think that there is definitely a Netflix numbers are definitely impacted by those days that we all have. I'm sure that's right. Where are you on on blame? We touched on it earlier, but I'd like just to kind of get into it in a bit more detail, because there's an awful lot of it around at the moment. If you wanted to look at politics, you can see it all over the papers and TV at the moment. But as I said, you've got cause to be angry, but you're not. You are about finding solutions without apportioning blame. Is that right?
But I think if you're in the kind of blame space, you're feeling like you blame someone and you want to say something about it. It's like, what's your end goal? Are you blaming because you think because they've done something wrong? Fair enough. Then isn't it better to have a conversation with that person or something to sort it out? But what do you want to achieve by continuing to blame? So for me, for example, if I continue to blame my parents for making me have rejection issues or whatever, what am I going to get out of that? What's my purpose? If it's not making me feel better, it doesn't make you feel better. I'm not. So what's the purpose? So that's why I don't blame anymore in this situation. I'm like, what is the point? I'm not gaining anything. There's like that expression of blaming. You hold resentment when you keep the blame. Resentment's very unhealthy. There's a phrase, and it's you can't hold a man down without staying down with him. And so there's no point. All you do is harm yourself. So unless, what is your end goal? Are you wanting to look better? Is it because you're insecure? Is it because you want to pay them back? What is it? So once you sort that out, maybe you can figure out another route to just blame. So I'm just interested in what the end goal is, and that's for me anyway. When I stop just blaming everyone, because what's the point? What do I want? Apology? What do I actually want?
I think for some people, the blame bit is about, they use blame to kind of either explain or excuse, or sometimes it's just pure retribution, right? That the retribution provides some solace. I mean, I'm with you. I think blame is ultimately, about as useful as why me. I think they're two sides of the same coin. But for you, it's what I love about your approach to it is that a lot of it seems to be driven by, well, what's the point of it? What's it actually going to deliver for me practically in my life going forward? How's it going to help me do the things that I want to do? Yeah, that's where you seem to kind of keep and root most of your ideas in this area.
Yeah, I mean, if someone does something to my car, I will blame them, and they will need to give me money and get it sorted. It's different. That's we're being responsible. So, but it's this continued blame. But I think there's a lot about insecurity in that. If you're talking about relationships and that kind of thing, blaming people and holding on to the resentment, I just don't really see the point. For retribution, is there another way that you could get retribution, and are you actually going to get that from blaming people?
And what's it going to do for you anyway?
How do you actually feel now?
Yeah.
Told everyone X, Y, Z. Do you actually do you really feel better?
Yeah.
Or do you not?
But you're just practical. This is what it's a practical approach. I think this is the mechanic in you coming out.
Well, my nickname is Mrs. Focused.
Your nickname is what?
Mrs. Solution Focused.
Very good. I think we need a catchier nickname, if you don't mind me saying so.
You need to what?
We need a catchier nickname. If you don't mind.
Solution focused all the way.
Solution focused. Very good. Look, we touched on lockdown, but we haven't really talked about it. I know it's been difficult for you in a way, because of course you've been separated from your daughter Ella, who I think lives in the States, very successful actress. But you've also got engaged.
I have indeed. Yeah.
When's the wedding?
The end of June, all being well.
Oh wow! So you're in the midst of along with everything else, you're in the midst of organising a wedding.
Well, we don't know how many people it's going to be, because it's like X at the moment. Is it going to be X, Y? We just don't know. Is the 21st the day when we all hug and throw our masks to the wind?
Or not? Yeah.
Or not?
Well, I hope it is, and I hope it goes brilliantly. And congratulations. And thanks so much for talking to me today. It's been a brilliant conversation, at least from my perspective. Not least because this practical approach that you've got is exactly what we want, this podcast to be, frankly, is for people to kind of take away, these ideas and thoughts from people who've been through crisis, who've lived it. And I think you're just an unbelievable example of that, Lorraine. So thank you so much for talking to us. I am now going to ask you for your crisis cures. So these are 3 things that you lean on in those why me moments, perhaps. So you can't have Netflix because you've already told us about that, and it can't be another human being, I'm afraid. So what comes to mind?
So one of my crisis cures is definitely exercise, and it's having that getting up in the morning, going to the gym, and getting on the treadmill, and each day trying to beat the previous 30-minute run.
Right. So
even if you only do 1 point, you just have to keep going up, and it gives you a great sense of achievement, and gets the dopamine and everything going when you're in the middle of a crisis. Definitely recommend exercise.
Great.
Yes, my favorite piece of music to listen to, which I have on repeat, is Vivaldi, The Four Seasons.
Yeah.
And it's spring.
Wonderful. Fantastic. And that's very stirring.
It is. So just have that on repeat. Just keep listening to it. And I find that very powerful. Music is a great cure, brilliant cure. And the third one is, it's probably make you a bit nauseated. You said earlier that you don't like the self-improvement woo-woo stuff.
I said I don't like some of it.
No, I take that back. Okay, yeah,
I don't like some of it.
Some of it, which I totally agree with you, by the way. But to me, when I was I'll tell you very briefly, I was dumped on the day that my mum died.
Oh, goodness.
And so the only way I got through that, I mean, that's a crisis. I'd say that's a crisis.
That definitely, yeah.
And so I used to say to myself, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. And I literally repeat it 1,000 times a day to get out of bed. You're going to be okay. You can do this. So it's constant self-talk, constant in the head. You're going to be okay. You can do this. You've got this. You're great. And it really, really works. It really, really works. And sometimes even just to go to the shop, because I just didn't feel like I could. Mm-hmm. I said that over and over and over again. So it sounds weird, especially for us Brits, but that positive self-talk, it was not even positive. It's like supportive. It's like
yes.
To get going self-talk. It really worked, but it is non-stop, like 1,000 times a day.
Fantastic. Lorraine, thank you so much for giving us some time today. Congratulations again on the engagement. I hope the wedding goes brilliantly.
Thank you.
And yeah, as I say, I just think this has been an incredibly useful chat for anyone who's looking for that kind of practical, no nonsense, no pity approach to handling crisis. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been wonderful.